so I can certainly kind of go off and start doing some of the introductions. So my name is Eileen Roden. I'm one of the directors of PMO Learning. I still do some of the course delivery, and this is one of the courses that I have delivered. This is a taster session on how to set up a PMO course. So in terms of my experience, I've been a PMO manager for a number of years before moving over to the other side to now do training and consultancy. Still very kind of heavily involved with real people who do, as I always say, a real job, at different size PMOs around different size organisations, both in the UK and elsewhere, very much feeding back into the profession now in looking at kind of some publications and certifications that I work with via the House of PMO, the professional body for people who work in and around PMOs. So, for those of you who perhaps have not been to a PMO Learning session before, not quite sure who we are, PMO Learning was a company set up by myself and my co-director Lindsay Scott a few years ago to really put some focus around people who want to or currently work in PMOs. We've both worked with project management organisations before and really felt that PMOs were kind of squashed and we were kind of the dregs at the side. So we've set up PMO Learning to specifically focus on PMO. We ensure that all of our training is highly interactive. So we've got lots of exercises, lots of opportunities for discussion, both to the trainers, but also to the other delegates who sit on the course. And I think the other thing which we're also kind of very kind of strict about, I think is probably as good a word as any, in that any of the trainers who deliver courses from PMO Learning have actually had solid PMO experience, and we've actually got a number of our trainers who are still actually do a PMO job, either as associate or full-time employed, who then kind of take time off to deliver training. So you're talking with people who are actually kind of been there, seen it, done it, or are in there doing it as we go through it. So it just means that some of the questions that you ask, some of the challenges that you've got, there's much more understanding and some really kind of helpful suggestions. And one of the things we're always really keen on is to and encourage is building up your network of individuals outside of your own PMO. So whether that's to people in other PMOs within your organisation, or if you are the only PMO in your organisation, then build a network with other people across your industry, across your country and across the globe, just to see how other people who have been or are in a similar position to you are making it happen. So let's get started in terms of today's session. So the idea is what we're going to do is just over the next probably 30 or 40 minutes, give yourselves an understanding of the content of the setting up a PMO course, but also in terms of how it's actually delivered in a virtual environment, which is probably, we keep saying, you know, kind of most people have been through a virtual training course now, but actually there's still a number of people who they've been on to a number of webinars, but haven't necessarily done some learning in a virtual environment. And there's still people aren't quite sure whether that's the equivalent of e-learning or whether it's, you know, kind of something that kind of sits on in the background or what's involved. So just for a little bit of clarity in terms of kind of what's involved in a virtual training session. For those of you who are kind of thinking, well, it's just like a webinar. Yes, we're all muted on entry. We're all, we don't necessarily have our cameras on. We're there as a kind of a faceless audience. That's really much more akin to something like a kind of a lecture. And that's not what our training sessions are about. And if you think about kind of what we're trying to do in our virtual classrooms is create the same kind of feeling as we would in a workshop when we were doing it face to face. So the idea is that we would have a small cohort. We limit the cohort to 12. So, you know, certainly within the kind of the first hour or so, everybody knows everybody else's names. We know kind of what companies they work for. They know what their current challenges are around PMO, what their aspirations are, and what they hope to get out of the course. So there really is a kind of a personal touch to that. But then as we go through the course, it becomes a conversation. Yes, the trainer will be there with lots of kind of theory to impart. There'll be materials that you'll have access to, but there's lots of opportunities for you to ask questions, to add and contribute to the course, but also to kind of where other delegates have got questions, the answer doesn't always need to come from the trainer. So we do break up the group of 12 into kind of groups of 3 and 4 to do exercises. So we use the Zoom technology to go off and do that. So very much, you feel as though you've been part of it. And I do tell the story. We had a delegate come on to one of our courses and said, I'll not be putting my camera on because I'm going to be busy doing emails. And you can think, well, you've absolutely got the wrong idea. Kind of being on a training course and learning is a proactive, interactive activity from the delegate's perspective. And so there was a bit of a readjusting of expectations with the delegate. And to help with that, we do have some kind of house rules that we do to encourage as we go through the course. The first one is actually helps if I can say it. The first one is about being visible. So we do ask when you're on the training course that you keep your camera on at all times. It just makes it important, certainly as a trainer, to get at least some visual feedback. So I can't get all of your kind of your physical feedback, but at least I can get some kind of facial feedback, which, when people kind of start doing this, or they kind of go, kind of get the puzzled look on their face, it just gives me a little bit more in terms of kind of making sure I'm kind of hitting the right things. But it also, I think it's really helpful for the other delegates to realize there's other human beings there, and we're not just kind of some faceless names that are sitting listening to this in the background. We do ask you to, where you can, shut down as many of your other applications. So we will be getting team notices, we'll be getting kind of emails popping up, WhatsApp messages, kind of Facebook notifications. And we do ask if we can kind of keep those to a minimum. We have breaks, coffee breaks and a lunch break that will give us time to catch up on those. And to actually get involved, to have those conversations, to ask the questions, and really get the most out of the training course. Now, we've got a mixture of certification courses and non-certification courses, and particularly the certification courses, we have a defined syllabus we absolutely must get through in order for all of the delegates to have a fair shout at being able to pass the exam. On the non-certification courses, so certainly a kind of course like this, the trainer will be doing everything they can on that kind of the first few sessions to get a real understanding of kind of what the needs are of the audience. So yes, we'll cover everything we said we covered in the course, but we might spend more time in particular areas that are of particular interest to the delegate. So any kind of contribution that you make at the beginning helps the trainer shape that. But also in terms of then, if we're doing that, kind of really asking your questions about how you can make it work for you in the workplace becomes really important. We do recognize that doing things by Zoom is, it still has some challenges from not being in the classroom, not least some kind of technical difficulties sometimes getting in the morning. Though to be fair, with Zoom we have very few problems. So some of the other software takes a few minutes for people to get logged in. So we do provide technical support at the start of every course to make sure people are comfortable. You'll get email joining instructions with all of the kind of the key information that you need prior to the course. And also we recognize that Zoom is particularly made for one person speaking at any one time. So when we get into a really exciting part of the course and there's lots of conversation, then actually it's quite difficult for Zoom to kind of work out which one person it should be focused on. And we still get that where everybody's kind of trying to talk at once. So we do make active use of the chat box. And again, as we go through this session, if you want to add a comment, if you want to ask a question, just kind of feel free to kind of do that. I think the other thing we also do in the chat box, which again, not every organization does, we let you speak to individuals. You don't have to ask everything through me. So if I wanted to kind of just drop a private note to Olivia and say, I really like the shelving you've got behind you, where did you get it from? I can just write that email to Olivia rather than to everybody in the group. And then the final thing is just, and again, it's helped by having people's cameras on, is just to help other people on the course and recognize, you know, if you've answered the question, the last 5 questions, just to let somebody else have an answer, or if you're in a small working group and you realize that actually somebody doesn't seem to be involved or asking a question, try to encourage them, and we go through as a group rather than just a bunch of individuals. So in terms of technology, we do use Zoom as our major delivery tool, as we've done on this session today. So we'll use it for PowerPoints. We will use the chat. Potentially we'll use breakout rooms. We're not going to use them in the session, but we will use kind of polls, etc. If we're doing an in-house course, if your in-house says, actually, we don't use Zoom, we use Teams, or we use GoToMeeting, we can do that. But on all of our public courses, we do use Zoom. We use a couple of other tools. We use Mentimeter, Miro, and Trello, though one of our trainers calls it Miro, which always throws me. I'm sure it's pronounced Miro. Mentimeter, Miro, and Trello for some of the exercises that we do. And I think it's just important to note that even though we use these other technologies, there is no cost to you as a delegate for using any of those technologies. So all of them will involve might involve you creating a log on, but it'll be a free membership that you get. So there's no additional cost for you or your organization. So that's the standard bit that covers all of our costs. Let's have a look at this setting up a PMO course. Now this is an interesting course because we have a number of other courses at PMO Learning, from the P3O course, and we've also got the Essentials for PMO Administrators, Analysts and Managers, and the Managers one has got a bit in about setting up a PMO. The P3O course, certification course, is also about what does a PMO do and why should it exist. So why did we need one that's not certification based, that is bespoke and built specifically because we thought there was a need in the marketplace? And I think what we've identified, there are a number of organizations and therefore a number of people working for those organizations where they're moving from, they're not necessarily set up as a PMO manager, and they're not even a kind of a PMO analyst. They've been asked to typically coming up from a project officer, might be a project coordinator, might even be a PMO analyst, but they've been asked to set up a PMO for their organization. And so it really is kind of a step up from kind of just having a bunch of projects around the organization and trying to get to grips with them. And it's potentially the first time that organization has had a PMO. There's not necessarily a huge load of investment, and we're really just kind of starting to feel our way around what that PMO might be. So this is really a kind of a first introduction to, if you're thinking about having a PMO in your organization, typically it's about having an oversight of the projects that are being delivered by your organization. This is who this course is aimed at. So again, we're looking at kind of what the role of the PMO is going to be, looking at kind of what's required from a governance perspective. So who makes a decision on projects? So that's kind of the start of a project plus the inside of every project, but also kind of where that sits within the broader business or organization. So how does our PMO and the project sit with our kind of operational activities of kind of finance, operations, logistics and sales, etc. So we talk about kind of putting that in context and what the remit of the PMO might be. And then there's this nice little bullet point which covers a huge multitude of skills, which says actually exploring the PMO implementation roadmap. So we've got within the course, and I'm going to bring it up shortly, just a roadmap to follow in order to be in a position where we've got something that looks and feels like a PMO that is kind of functioning the way that we would have it function. And then we will spend predominantly most of day 2 looking at how you can do those learnings and what it looks like for you and your organization. And again, the person who will be delivering the course, that whether that be me or Graham, typically who runs our course now, will actually kind of be able to give you helpful hints and tips and advice and guidance, but also you'll get that from some of the other delegates on the course who may not necessarily feel they're giving you help help, assistance and guidance, but just asking you some questions helps you to think through some of the aspects that need to be considered when you're going to be setting up the PMO in your organisation. So the 2 days that is the course. We do a little bit of an introduction in terms of things like kind of definitions and what's this thing about governance and how does that change and what does that mean from a project and program perspective. And then we go through the implementation roadmap. And kind of the next step. So I don't think that kind of says an awful lot in terms of what's actually kind of involved in the course. And I think this next slide is probably going to give us a better picture of the types of things that are covered on the course. And this is the PMO implementation roadmap. And we deliberately have not made it a nice straight line, because when we're setting up the PMO, particularly for the first time in an organisation, it tends to kind of meander. We get kind of knocked a little bit off kilter, and we have to kind of go back and kind of recalibrate. So it's deliberately not a straight line that we do. So these are kind of some of the key activities we kind of take you through, and again we'll give you some best management practice in terms of what's involved, some hints and tips so it'll help you in your particular context. So first things first is actually just kind of understand what we've been asked to do. Yes, why we've been asked to do it, who's asked us to do it, and what their expectations are from that PMO. So that's always kind of some interesting conversations, because that absolutely drives whether we're going to be kind of doing things for project managers, whether we're doing things for senior executives, or actually a mix of the two. We'll take some time in terms of understanding, and again we'll go through some kind of tools and techniques and understand what's the current situation in our organisation. Do we have any projects in flight? Do we do them on a formal basis? Does everybody kind of do it as they want, or actually is that part and parcel of setting up the PMO? So that's where we go with the current situation, and then recognizing that even though there's one particular group or one particular person who's requested the setup, then actually yes, we've got some other people who've got interested who are going to be impacted, and getting an understanding and appreciation of all of those different stakeholders is absolutely key. Just to respond to your question, Sarah, yes, there'll be we actually release the recording of this, so you'll get a copy of the slides embedded in the recording afterwards, so you can kind of pick that up. So that's engaging with the stakeholders, and then we go on to actually start agreeing as well. We know why we were asked to do it in the first place. We've now kind of widened that conversation to the other people who might be interested or impacted, and what we want to do is get to some formal documentation, signed agreement, whatever we want to call that. We call it here as a chart, and we've got a template that we share with you in terms of actually, so everybody's got a shared understanding of what the PMO might do, because you know, in different organizations, PMOs can do a huge number of things. There's a book here called PMO Services, and it literally is a great big thick document, and nobody expects every PMO in the world to do all of those activities. It is about doing, you know, kind of choosing which of those activities is particularly important for us in terms of what we've been asked to do, what the organisation currently does, and those kind of stakeholder input. So we will help you kind of put that and articulate that in a way that we can get some formal agreement in terms of what's actually required by this PMO. Now, undoubtedly, particularly, which is why we kind of do this separately in this course, because we think a large part of setting up the PMO for an organisation, it isn't just that they want a PMO and some visibility of the projects. There wants to be some formalisation into how we do projects in our organisation. And so what we spend some time doing, we go through this course, is actually we'll introduce you to a basic delivery framework and look at how some of the decisions, some of the things that you need to agree to be able to develop an appropriate project development framework for your particular organization. So we may have heard of Prince2, we may have heard of PMI, Praxis is another one, but actually they can feel very big and cumbersome. And the idea of this course is, how do we kind of start getting a little bit more formal around project and program management in a way that we're ready for? And it was really interesting. I was chatting to somebody on a call earlier this morning about kind of how we set the right level.
Finish this meeting. I'll talk to you later.
And the conversation very much was, well, actually, what we need to do is we always need to meet the people where they actually are. There's no point kind of standing far way down the road and say, come on this way. We need to kind of meet them where they are and kind of take them forward. So, kind of that initial self-assessment of where our project and program management processes are, where's the understanding of the senior executive team in terms of what's their role in terms of kind of the governor around the projects. We then need to work from that perspective and take it forward. So in this particular section, what we'll talk about is which elements of a delivery framework perhaps you might want to focus on first, how you might address some of the challenges when trying to implement that delivery framework. So we'll take you through kind of potentially kind of where you might want to pilot, what you might want to pilot, who you might want to pilot that with, what you learn from that pilot, and then going forward from that pilot, do a review and update of the framework. So yes, sometimes it might go through that and it might whistle through that review and update and say it was perfect. There are other times we get some really kind of good feedback, not only on kind of what we want to change immediately, but perhaps some things that we want to develop going on. So we do look in terms of the rollout, but also recognize there will be some continuous embedding and improvement work that needs to be undertaken to make things stick with the organization. So you can see is that we tend to cover quite a few different elements off, and depending on where the various delegates are, we may spend more time in terms of looking at what the life cycle looks like for a project. We may spend a little bit more time in terms of how to develop a good set of templates for your organization. We might spend more time on looking at the kind of the key roles and the roles of senior managers, as well as the project manager and the project teams in the delivery of those projects. But the idea is, in terms of wherever you are in your organization, you will have a view in terms of, well, how do I take us from where we are now to where we want to be next in the organization. Anybody got any questions about that implementation roadmap? It's one of the interesting things about a lot of kind of what we do in PMO and project management. You look at it and say, well, that's just kind of common sense. And good old Stephen Covey said, just because it's common sense doesn't make it common practice. And actually, until you kind of see it written down as a kind of an end-to-end piece of work, then actually it's kind of sometimes difficult to put that picture together, which is hopefully kind of what we do for you. But actually, kind of we will walk you through that as we go through the course. So I thought I'd just give you an indication. I think it's always good to give you an indication of exactly kind of one particular element. Obviously, I can't do it for all of the course because that's kind of 2 days worth. But I thought I'd just kind of touch on one particular element, which is around this governance of project, program and portfolio management, and just getting our heads around how organizations need to start thinking about projects versus business as usual. And we use this this diagram to demonstrate and have conversations around kind of where organizations have come from and where we currently are in generally a kind of across the globe, in that we would set an organization up. And when you ask, kind of what do you have in an organization when you set an organization up, we get some of the normal answers. Well, you'd have an HR department, you'd have a finance department, you'd have a sales department and a logistics department. And we would set our business up to do all of those standard business as usual things. We buy things in from our suppliers, we sell them to customers, we invoice customers, we pay the staff, and so life goes on. And essentially every organization, every business that's been set up, that's what it's there to do. But at some point, an organization has to say, well, actually, there's some new technology comes out, and we need to think about whether we want to change the current way of doing things by introducing some new technology. Currently, we're very much a local business, and we sell kind of face to face. Perhaps we might want to develop some online business, and then the world does a kind of a thing for us and says, actually, you've now all kind of got to stay at home because of the potential pandemic, and so the world says, actually, you're going to have to change because we're going to have to work out how we can keep our business running by staying at home. So most organizations, when they set up, are all about running the business, that bit on the left hand side. But as the business kind of continues to exist and not even to grow, it has to recognize, to stay relevant, to stay profitable, to stay in business, and even a third, we're talking about public sector, to kind of stay functioning and doing the things we need to do, or even as a third sector, as a charity, in order to still be able to do what we need to do. We can't just stay still. We're going to have to do and change things in our organizations. Now, and that seems quite feasible. But then we've got some interesting choices to make, in that if we wrote out or even spoke to the kind of all of the people in charge or the executive team, whoever, and said, what are your suggestions for how we can improve our organization? You're going to potentially come up with a whole list of potential things that you want to do. And there needs to be some conscious choices about where we want to invest our time and our money, which of those changes are going to be right to actually kind of take forward and implement. And there's a danger if we take too many, because we're going to have too many people working on changes and not enough people on continuing to run the business. But if we take too few, the business will it'll become out of date and our products will become out of date. So there's quite a kind of an interesting kind of set of activities to make sure we choose the right projects to do. And part of the role of the PMO is to help the organization to decide on what are those changes, which of those changes we actually want to make into projects and formally deliver. The same is true as those projects finish and we're ready to say, well, actually, we've implemented the project and we're about to put the new process live, where e-businesses are ready to go live, or new computer system is to go live. We have to do that in such a way that it doesn't completely disrupt the business. Yes, we can't just shut the business down for 6 weeks and say, just hold on, guys, where we where we're going to make some changes, and when we're all completely settled, we'll be reopening for business in 6 weeks' time, because obviously that just doesn't make any sense at all. So we have to make sure that we can implement those changes in a timely fashion, where people who are going to be involved in that change know what's coming and can work in the new ways of working or the new elements of business. So keeping this kind of circle of kind of changes that need to be developed, projects being undertaken, projects coming back into business as usual, can all sit within the remit of the PMO. About how we do that prioritization, how we kind of deliver projects, and then how do we feed them back into the organization to make sure the business can still run seamlessly. So when we talk about governance, yes, it's all about kind of how we kind of organize ourselves and make decisions. And when it comes to projects and programs, let me just kind of completely kind of put that up, because it seemed to come up in a strange order. Over everything is corporate governance. So there are rules and regulations that are set that we have to comply with in our organization. So there are things around finance, people get upset apparently if we don't pay our taxes, so there's certain kind of legal things that we have to do, and key roles and responsibilities, decisions that have to be made, and business as usual have certain decisions that need to be made. Now, when we're establishing the PMO, when we're establishing project management in our organizations, we now need to think about this kind of portfolio governance. So what projects are actually going to be included in our what we call our portfolio of change. Yes, so how many projects do we want at any one time? Who's going to be looking after them? How are they going to be monitored and managed? So that's a kind of a key part of kind of understanding from a portfolio governance perspective. And then down at the next level is around actually kind of individual program and project governance. So if we decide something is a project, you know, kind of what are the key rules around that? So project manager, project sponsor, and the project team. So where do we get those project managers from? Are they people who are part-time business as usual? Do we have a kind of standalone project managers? So making sure that we're clear when we're establishing project and program management in our organization, we understand these different levels of governance and we kind of thought through what the implications of those are. Because often organizations say, well, we want to set up a project management, and they think all of the work is with the project managers themselves on how they're actually going to deliver the projects. But actually a lot of it is how we allow those project managers to be able to do their job by kind of making sure, you know, they've got the right projects and the right people working with them. So in terms of kind of understanding what the benefits are to the organization, and again, when we're setting off on our journey of the establishing a PMO, and we're potentially going to be spending some money and certainly some time, we may be required to develop a business case. Now, it may not necessarily be in terms of pound, shillings and pence, but certainly want to be able to articulate some of the benefits of running of having a PMO in our organization. And again, this kind of helps us start thinking about you know, kind of why we've been set up and what we want to do. So again, we start looking at kind of what some of those benefits are. And we introduce this concept of project, program and portfolio management maturity. So there are some metrics out there. P3M3 is one of those tools that allows us to understand what level of project management we're currently at, where we need to get from our organization, which helps us draw this roadmap. And there's some kind of detailed conversations around each of those particular levels of maturity. And one of the interesting questions, just kind of going back a couple of slides in terms of this one, sorry, there's something I forgot to mention at this point, which I think is a really important element for our organizations, is having that conversation of when is a project a project. Anybody from their organizations have got a definition that they use as for when does a project become formally recognized as a project in their organization? Or nobody's at that stage yet. So this is a really important point because, and I absolutely blame Alan Sugar for this. Yes, the term project is used now for almost anything. And my 7-year-old granddaughter comes home from school on a Friday and says, "Oh, Grandma, I've got a project." And I don't sit down with her and say, right, then the first thing we need to do, Eva May, is work out who the key stakeholders are and build a business case to see whether we actually want to do this piece of work or not. And then we'll do a plan, make sure it's fully resourced, and then we'll get on and make sure that's formally signed off. And we might want to write a project charter as well. Of course, we don't do any of that. Yes, we just kind of get on and do it. And so then it becomes kind of really quite important to say that actually, if we're going to put some formality around projects in our organization, how big and how ugly does that piece of work have to be? And that is an incredibly important, but often kind of not thought about aspect of setting up project management in an organization and setting up a PMO to kind of go through that. So very much that's a really interesting conversation. We do have a conversation with the delegates in terms of kind of what that means and what the implications for that are, because potentially if we go down to every last little piece of work, we're probably going to kind of, or we could sell almost anything as a project in the organization rather than just those kind of key elements that contribute to change. So when we've kind of walked through that, this is a kind of a typical kind of exercise, because what we don't want to do as we go through the course is kind of sit there and preach to you. What we do want to do is to engage your brains and help you think through this, because we will only cover off kind of some of it as much as we can in the 2 days, and there'll be other aspects. So what we're trying to do is help you to kind of think broader, and so this is kind of one of the starting questions in terms of what are the components of a project delivery framework. What do you think might need to be included? What's in the scope of work to get a delivery framework set up? And although we have an answer that we talk to in terms of your kind of 5 key elements, which is the 5 key elements we will cover off on the course, the delegates might assume there's lots of other things. And again, this is where the kind of the beauty of having a trainer who's been there, seen and done it, is they can talk about perhaps other elements that the delegates have brought up, and provide some, kind of the typical trainer says, that's a really good point there, Charles. What I'm going to do is after break, I'll come back and we'll discuss that. And at break time, the trainer is there pulling together some additional resources that they've got access to, so they can kind of supplement it. It's much easier to do that on a non-certification course than a certification course. So again, we've got, kind of some useful input from ourselves, but actually we'll respond to the things that the delegates come up with. So those are the 5 things we talk about. We do reference the fact that there are lots of other frameworks and methodologies, but we will work through the kind of the key 5 elements of that framework against the challenges of the particular delegates who are sitting on the course. So that's the kind of the key aspect of the course. And again, kind of from a training perspective and in terms of the content, I think, kind of the really the one that is most telling to kind of give us an understanding of what's on the course is really this roadmap. Is to understand, kind of we take you through each of those steps. We've talked through some of the particular elements, and we've talked in some of the details, given an example of some of the exercises that we would do. Just want to make sure, is everybody happy that they've got an understanding of what the course is about and whether it's right or not right for them, as they'd anticipated? Anybody got any outstanding questions on that course? Has that answered the questions that you had? Excellent. We've got some kind of thumbs up. Okay, so if you're interested on the course, the next course that we've got is on the 25th and the 26th of October. If after having sat through this session, you're not sure it's the right course for you, then Charles is available to put to answer any further questions. So he's going to put his contact details in chat any minute now. Or you can contact us via the interweb. We have got some other courses available coming up through September. I've put them on the session there. So the Foundation and Practitioner P3O course. We've got Unlocking Business Agility Through Portfolio Management. So exactly what I said, that balance of kind of what projects we should be doing and not doing and where we prioritize them. And then we've got a course on project assurance on the 21st and the 22nd of September. One last thing in terms of kind of our particular training, we can deliver those courses in-house, but we do offer a follow-up service. I say follow-up, it's not a free service, but we can help you. We've got access to a number of our trainers, also do some consultancy. So if you want some help embedding some of the principles, we can do that. And we also offer some one-to-one coaching. So if you're busy doing this activity and you really want some kind of support, be able to chat things through and some kind of one-to-one advice and guidance, then we do have availability for some embedding and coaching. So that's me done. That's our contact details. I hope you found it useful. Have a fantastic Friday afternoon and hopefully a lovely weekend. And we'll see you hopefully on a course soon.